You see them everywhere in the dairy aisle, colorful tubs promising light, high-protein fruit on the bottom. You probably assume yogurt is one of the safest things to eat after 60. The shocking truth is that many commercial yogurts on supermarket shelves have been altered so extensively that they no longer deliver the benefits we used to count on. And in some cases, the way they're made and the ingredients they hide can actually make problems common in older adults worse. I'm Dr. Emily Carter. I've been caring for older patients for 20 years, and I want to walk you through exactly which yogurts can be problematic, why they're risky for people over 60, and what to choose instead. I'll point you to the studies and sources in the description below, and I'll give practical swaps you can start doing tomorrow. Before we go any further, where are you watching from? Do you still eat yogurt every morning? Drop that in the comments. I read every message, and those replies help me know what examples to use in future videos. First, a short promise. This is not a lecture, and it's not about shame. It's about facts and practical choices. I'll explain the physiology that matters for older adults. I'll show you 4 types of yogurt you should avoid after 60 and exactly why. And I'll offer 4 better options that preserve the real benefits of fermented dairy. Then I'll give label reading tips and simple swaps you can make today. A quick editorial note before the technical stuff. You may hear ingredient names pronounced or spelled oddly in some transcripts or product labels. When I say carrageenan guar gum or acetylsulfame potassium, those are the standard ingredient names. If a transcript or label uses a misspelling like cargeenan or gargum or something similar, I'm correcting it to the commonly accepted term. If a name is truly unclear or ambiguous, I'll say so. And finally, whenever I mention studies show or research suggests, I'll put the links and citations in the description so you can read the evidence directly. Why yogurt changed, and why aging biology matters. Yogurt was once, in many cultures, closer to food medicine. It was simple milk fermented with live cultures, microbes that help digest lactose, nudge the immune system, and contribute to a healthy community of gut bacteria. In older adults, those live cultures can be particularly valuable. Aging tends to reduce microbiome diversity, slow digestion, lower stomach acid, and change how the body handles glucose and protein. Bones start losing density, and muscles become harder to maintain. Those are the physiological realities that make the choice of dairy important after 60. But over decades, manufacturing and marketing shifted yogurt away from that original function. Convenience, shelf stability, and mass appeal demanded texture, long shelf life, and a flavor profile that appeals to broad tastes. The food industry met those demands by removing fat, which makes people feel fuller longer, adding sugars and flavorings, and using stabilizers and protein isolates to recreate the texture and protein claims consumers wanted. Some products are heat-treated or processed in ways that reduce or eliminate live bacteria. Others replace real fermentation with additives that mimic creaminess or protein content, but lack the biological benefits. So the things that make yogurt helpful for older adults, the live cultures, the natural fat that slows digestion, the intact milk matrix that aids mineral absorption, are exactly the things many commercial products have replaced. The result? A product that looks like yogurt on the label, but behaves more like a sugary convenience dessert metabolically. Given the metabolic and digestive shifts that occur with age, that can mean more blood sugar spikes, poorer appetite control, and a gut environment less hospitable to beneficial microbes. 4 yogurts to avoid after 60. And why? 1. Low-fat fruit yogurt. This is the kind of tub that promises fat-free and has a thick, sweet layer of fruit or fruit-flavored puree sitting on the bottom. It's marketed as lighter, but the way manufacturers compensate for removed fat is what creates trouble. What the product often contains and why that matters. When fat is removed, manufacturers frequently add 20-25 grams or more of added sugar per serving to restore flavor. They also add thickeners and stabilizers, so a fat-free product feels creamy in the mouth. The combination of low fat and high added sugar accelerates gastric emptying, meaning the contents leave the stomach faster, so blood sugar rises more rapidly after eating. For older adults who already tend toward insulin resistance or impaired glucose tolerance, that spike can worsen blood sugar control over time and increase hunger shortly after the meal. Clinical consequences I see in practice. I have patients who switched from having a bowl of granola and fruit to a daily serving of low-fat fruit yogurt because they thought it was a healthier choice. Within a few weeks, they report more mid-morning fatigue, increased cravings for sweets, and in some cases, higher fasting glucose readings. These observations are clinical patterns, not proof of cause and effect, but they align with metabolic studies showing that foods with high sugar and low fat create more pronounced glycemic excursions. Practical swap. Replace low-fat fruit yogurt with plain, full-fat Greek yogurt and add fresh berries yourself. The fat in full-fat varieties slows digestion, blunts glucose spikes, and increases satiety. If the taste is an issue, a small drizzle of honey or a mashed banana stirred in provides sweetness without the sugar loaded in commercial fruit preparations. Look for a product that lists only milk and live cultures on the ingredient list. No fruit premix, no glucose-fructose syrup, and no long sugar lists under different names. 2. Flavored commercial Greek-style yogurt. Greek became a household word because of its higher protein and thicker texture, but many of the flavored, single-serving Greek yogurts on the shelf are not the probiotic powerhouse their marketing implies. What the product often contains and why that matters. To get a thick texture and keep fat low, producers commonly use gums and stabilizers like carrageenan or guar gum, and sometimes modified starches. They might also add processed protein concentrates to inflate the protein number, and use artificial or concentrated flavorings that don't contribute anything to gut health. Some of these stabilizers can alter the local gut environment. Lab and animal studies have suggested that certain emulsifiers and gums may stress the gut lining and reduce microbiome diversity, and that change in the gut community is exactly what older adults struggle with already. Clinical consequences I see in practice. Patients will eat these high-protein flavored yogurts thinking they're doing something helpful for muscle maintenance, only to experience incrementally worse bloating, loose stool, or persistent digestive discomfort. In frailer individuals or those with reduced kidney function, taking in large amounts of isolated protein powders or concentrates can also create a workload on the kidneys. So for those people, very high protein intake from supplements should be discussed with a doctor. Again, the pattern I describe is observational, but it fits with research linking heavily processed dairy additives to microbiome changes and with renal physiology that warrants caution. Practical swap: choose plain, full-fat Greek-style yogurt whose ingredient list is short, ideally only milk and live cultures. If you want more protein, layer a scoop of plain Greek yogurt with nuts or seeds and a small portion of fruit. That way you get intact dairy protein plus whole food fats and fibers that stabilize blood sugar. Mini hook. Number 3 surprised even some physicians in my clinic. It's the protein-enhanced yogurts that look like the healthiest option, but the label hides critical differences. 3. Artificially sweetened and protein-enhanced yogurts. These are marketed to athletes and to weight-conscious shoppers. Protein-packed cups, sometimes labeled high protein or protein style, and often sweetened with artificial sweeteners like sucralose or acesulfame potassium. What the product often contains and why that matters. A few things are important here. First, many of these products are ultra-processed. They can contain milk protein concentrates, whey protein isolates, and other isolated protein fractions that are different from the protein you get in intact dairy. Those isolated proteins can be harder for some older adults to digest and are not the same as having the protein within the yogurt matrix. Second, artificial sweeteners such as sucralose and acesulfame potassium, while low-calorie, are not inert in the gut. Research suggests they may alter the composition of gut bacteria in ways that are unfavorable for glucose metabolism. Third, many of these protein-enhanced cups are heat-treated or processed in ways that reduce or eliminate live cultures. Clinical consequences I see in practice. I've had several patients with long-standing constipation or metabolic syndrome switch to these high-protein cups, thinking they were supporting their muscles. Instead, they reported increased bloating and more difficulty regulating their weight. For a few patients with stage 3 or worse chronic kidney disease, feeding high daily loads of isolated protein without medical supervision can be harmful. That's why I always recommend discussing major changes in protein intake with the clinician who manages kidney function. Research framing. Small trials and animal studies indicate that artificial sweeteners can modify the microbiome and that isolated protein fractions behave differently metabolically than intact food proteins. These changes are not deterministic, meaning not everyone will have a problem, but they do create plausible mechanisms by which these products may be less helpful or even harmful in susceptible older adults. Practical swap. Use plain Greek yogurt as your protein source and add small, whole food protein boosters like a sprinkle of crushed nuts or a tablespoon of chia or hemp seeds. If you want to increase protein without risking artificial sweeteners or isolated proteins, add a small portion of cooked egg, a few slices of smoked salmon, or a modest handful of roasted chickpeas on the side. 4. Frozen yogurt. Many people assume frozen yogurt is a lighter alternative to ice cream. It often tastes tangy and yogurty, and some chains advertise live cultures. But the reality in many cases is different. What manufacturers often do and why it matters: to extend shelf life, prevent ice crystals, and get a smooth mouthfeel at low temperatures, frozen yogurt is frequently pasteurized or heat-treated in a way that kills most live bacteria. It also tends to be a high-sugar dessert with added sweeteners and often contains stabilizers and emulsifiers similar to those in flavored Greek-style yogurts. In other words, frozen yogurt often loses the microbiological benefits of fermentation and acquires the metabolic harms of a dessert-like product. A clinical vignette that illustrates the pattern. I remember Mary, a retired schoolteacher in her late 70s, who told me she had given up ice cream for frozen yogurt because she thought it was healthier. She ate a small cup almost every day after lunch. Over several months, she developed rising fasting blood sugars and persistent bloating after meals. When we reviewed her routine and added up the sugar in her frozen yogurt, plus the jam she liked on toast at breakfast, her daily added sugar intake was far higher than she realized. After switching to a modest bowl of plain Greek yogurt with a few frozen blueberries, her mid-afternoon crashes and bloating improved. Practical swap. If you miss the frozen texture, try freezing dollops of plain, full-fat Greek yogurt mixed with raspberries and a squeeze of lemon into small pops. No added sugar. Or choose a small serving of plain Greek yogurt topped with a handful of frozen berries for a similar sensory experience without the sugar spike. At this point, I usually pause with patients and say, "Okay, that's the bad news. Let's talk about the good news." But before I go there, I need to tackle an important and sometimes confusing practical matter: ingredient literacy. When products contain long lists of chemical-sounding names, it's hard to know what to avoid. So let's take a minute to clear up the names you'll see on labels and why they matter. Ingredient literacy. Names to notice and what they mean. When you open a yogurt tub, the ingredient list is the single most reliable tool you have. The colors and claims on the front are marketing. The ingredient panel is the truth. For older adults, a few words should raise immediate red flags because they are associated with sugar load, loss of live cultures, or additives that can alter the gut environment. Sugar and its many aliases. Sugar can appear as plain sugar, but it also hides under many names: sucrose, high fructose corn syrup solids, fructose, fructose syrup, glucose, glucose fructose syrup, maltodextrin, dextrose, and concentrated fruit juices. A serving with 20-25 grams of added sugar is not unusual in fruit-flavored low-fat tubs. As a practical rule, check the grams of added sugars and compare them to the total. If added sugars are above 10-15 grams per serving, it's high. 20 to 25 grams per serving is common in many fruit-on-the-bottom products and is roughly equivalent to 5 teaspoons of sugar. Stabilizers and gums. Names like carrageenan, guar gum, xanthan gum, locust bean gum, and modified food starch are used to thicken and stabilize. Their presence is not an automatic stop sign. Many people tolerate them, but several of these additives have been implicated in lab or animal studies as having the potential to irritate the gut lining or alter the microbiome. If you already have persistent gastrointestinal sensitivity, choosing yogurt without these added stabilizers is a cautious choice. Artificial sweeteners and sugar substitutes, sucralose, acesulfame potassium, aspartame, saccharin. These are low or no-calorie sweeteners used in diet or light products. Studies suggest they may change gut bacteria and glucose homeostasis in some people. For older adults with existing metabolic issues, avoiding artificial sweeteners in favor of minimal natural sweetening or none at all is often wiser. Isolated protein ingredients. Whey protein isolate, milk protein concentrate, caseinates. These are processed protein fractions that can be added to make a product look protein-rich on the label. They differ from intact dairy protein and can be harder to digest for some older adults. Very high daily intake of isolated proteins should be discussed with a clinician, especially for those with reduced kidney function. Heat-treated claims and no live cultures. Some labels explicitly say heat-treated after fermentation or list no live cultures. If the product has been pasteurized after fermentation, many of the beneficial live bacteria will be inactive or dead. Look for the presence of named live cultures, Lactobacillus acidophilus, Bifidobacterium species, Streptococcus thermophilus, and so on the ingredient list. If you don't see any live cultures named, the product likely won't deliver probiotic benefits. A brief editorial clarification: you may find products or transcriptions that use misspellings, carginen, gargum, or asylum potassium. In almost all cases, those map to carrageenan, guar gum, and acesulfame potassium respectively. When in doubt, assume the standard ingredient unless a product clearly uses a different additive. Mini hook. Now that you can spot the obvious red flags on labels, I want to return to the 4 to choose. But before I get there, there's one more product group I need to finish discussing because they're deceptively common. I started telling you about frozen yogurt, but there's one more reason frozen or heat-treated desserts matter for seniors: the live cultures. The importance of live cultures and fermentation for older adults. This is the central biological point I want to be crystal clear about. The primary health benefits of traditional yogurt come from the fermentation process and the live microbes it provides. Those microbes help break down lactose, produce short-chain fatty acids that feed the gut lining, and interact with the immune system in ways that can reduce inflammation. For older adults, a microbiome with greater diversity and with specific beneficial strains can improve bowel regularity, reduce low-grade inflammation, and contribute to better metabolic signaling. But not all yogurts contain live cultures that reach your gut in an active state. Heat-treated products, many frozen yogurts, and cups that have been processed to be shelf-stable may not have live microbes left. Some products have live cultures at the time of bottling, but are then stored and handled in ways that reduce viability. Others never contained robust cultures in the first place because they used heat-treated bases mixed with probiotics later or relied on pasteurization after fermentation. If your goal is gut health, look for plain products that list live cultures by name and avoid products that say heat-treated after fermentation or make no mention of cultures. Kefir, homemade fermented yogurt, and many plain full-fat Greek yogurts will typically have more viable cultures than heat-treated dessert-style products. A clinical observation about measurable changes. In some small trials and in clinical practice, improvements in bowel regularity and reductions in inflammatory markers have been seen after regular consumption of fermented dairy with live cultures, sometimes in as little as 3 weeks. That's not a universal outcome and not a guaranteed one, but it's consistent enough that when a patient with chronic constipation or low-grade inflammatory symptoms adds a reliable source of live cultures, we frequently see incremental improvement. I'll put the relevant studies in the description so you can review the sample sizes and endpoints yourself. Kidney cautions and protein, a short, important medical caveat. I need to be very clear about one clinical caveat that affects some older adults. Very high intakes of isolated protein powders or concentrates can be a problem in people with reduced kidney function. The kidneys help filter the byproducts of protein metabolism. In someone with normal kidney function, increasing protein modestly to support muscle mass is usually fine. In someone with known chronic kidney disease, especially stage 3B or worse, large daily increases in isolated protein intake, like consuming multiple protein-fortified cups daily over years, may accelerate decline. This is not a reason to avoid protein completely. It is a reason to discuss the total daily protein load with your clinician and dietitian and to prefer whole food protein sources and intact dairy protein when possible. If you have kidney disease, bring your yogurt choices up in your next appointment so your clinician can give personalized advice. Patient vignette: the healthy swap that backfired. Let me tell you about Henry, a 68-year-old retired contractor with type 2 diabetes. Henry came to clinic because his blood sugar had crept upward despite his metformin dose and a modest walking routine. He showed me a photo of his usual breakfast, a low-fat, high-protein flavored Greek yogurt cup and a banana. He had switched to that product because the label said high protein and low fat, and because the cup looked healthy. When we looked closer, the yogurt contained sucralose, carrageenan and a milk protein concentrate, and it listed no live cultures. The sugar substitute didn't show up as added sugar grams, but studies suggest artificial sweeteners can alter gut bacteria in ways that affect glucose control. After switching to plain, full-fat Greek yogurt with a handful of nuts and fresh berries, Henry's morning glucose variability fell, and he reported fewer afternoon cravings. This is a single clinical course, not a randomized trial, but it mirrors what I see repeatedly. Marketing claims can mislead, and a short ingredient review plus a modest swap can make measurable differences in daily glucose patterns and appetite control. Where we are now, and why I'm pausing before the final bad case. We've covered 3 of the 4 yogurt types I recommend avoiding. Low-fat fruit yogurt, flavored commercial Greek products full of stabilizers and hidden sugars, and ultra-processed protein, artificially sweetened cups. I also started on frozen yogurt and explained how the pasteurization and sugar content often remove the probiotic and metabolic benefits. Those 4 categories capture the bulk of products that behave like desserts rather than fermented food. Up next, I was going to pivot to the good news. The 4 yogurts and fermented dairy options I recommend you eat regularly, and give detailed guidance on goat milk yogurt, plain full-fat Greek yogurt, kefir, and homemade yogurt. I'll also give specific label reading tips, serving size recommendations, and starter instructions for kefir so you can begin introducing it safely. But before we get there is one more practical point I want to make, and a common question I hear in clinic that deserves its own short answer. How much yogurt is too much, and how do you balance yogurt with other protein and phosphorus concerns as you age? Portion sizes, frequency, and balancing nutrients after 60. Yogurt can be a helpful part of a meal plan, but portion sizes matter more than most people think. A standard serving of yogurt is usually around 150 to 200 grams, about 5 to 7 ounces. For most older adults, a single serving of plain full-fat Greek yogurt provides a good balance of protein, fat, and live cultures without excessive added sugars. If you add nuts, seeds, or fruit, that makes a well-rounded snack or part of a meal. If you are trying to preserve muscle mass, spacing protein throughout the day tends to be more effective than concentrating it in one meal. So using yogurt as a mid-morning or mid-afternoon protein source can be sensible, coupled with other protein at lunch and dinner. If you have kidney disease, the math changes. Your clinician will advise on total daily protein and phosphorus targets. A practical framing I use with patients is this: aim for a serving of plain yogurt most days, rather than several flavored cups. Rotate your fermented dairy, plain full-fat Greek yogurt, kefir, and goat yogurt, so you don't over-rely on a single product that could contain hidden additives. Think in terms of variety and whole food pairings. Yogurt plus fruit and nuts beats yogurt with added industrial sweeteners and stabilizers. Transition point: the good news ahead. I'm about to walk through the 4 fermentations and yogurt types I encourage for older adults, why they work, how to choose them carefully, and simple starter routines so you don't overwhelm the gut when you're introducing probiotics. I'll explain why goat milk yogurt can be gentler, why plain full-fat Greek yogurt often wins for muscle and bone support, and why kefir may offer the highest probiotic diversity of the lot. I'll also include a short how-to on making reliable homemade yogurt, and a practical shopping checklist with red flag ingredient names to avoid and green flag cues to look for. But before I launch into those recommendations, I want to pause here and ask one question that helps guide what I'll describe next. Are you more interested in convenience, meaning store-bought options you can trust? Or are you open to making small amounts of yogurt or kefir at home? Tell me in the comments right now whether convenience or home prep is your priority, and I'll tailor the next part of this walkthrough to the mix of tips most of you need. Okay, let's get to the good news. There are 4 fermented dairy options that, when chosen and prepared carefully, preserve the biological benefits we want for people over 60. Goat milk yogurt, plain full-fat Greek yogurt, kefir, and homemade plain yogurt. I'll explain exactly why each one helps, how to choose them in the store, simple ways to prepare and enjoy them, and practical starter routines so you don't overwhelm your gut. I'll also give a clear, usable shopping checklist and specific portion guidance at the end. 1. Goat milk yogurt, gentler digestion, easier absorption. Why it helps. Goat milk has a slightly different structure than cow's milk. The fat globules are smaller, and the casein proteins are arranged differently, which can make digestion easier for some older adults who have mild lactose intolerance or sensitive guts. Goat milk also tends to have minerals in forms that some studies suggest are more bioavailable, meaning the body can absorb them more easily, which is relevant for calcium and bone health as we age. What to look for in the store. Choose plain, full-fat goat milk yogurt that lists only milk and live cultures if possible. Avoid flavored tubs that add sugar, and avoid products with long lists of stabilizers or protein isolates. If the label names live cultures, Lactobacillus acidophilus, Bifidobacterium, Streptococcus thermophilus, that's a good sign. How seniors often benefit. In my clinic, I've seen older patients who've struggled with bloating or discomfort after cow milk yogurts improve when they switch to plain goat milk yogurt. Those changes are anecdotal observations, not proof, but they align with what we know about different milk matrices and tolerance patterns. Practical serving and pairings. Start with a standard serving, about 5 to 7 ounces, 150-200 grams. If you're new to goat milk yogurt, try a small serving once daily for a week and note how you feel. Pair it with whole fruit berries, a sprinkle of chopped nuts, or a teaspoon of honey if you need sweetness. The natural fat in goat yogurt will help blunt glucose spikes and increase satiety. 2. Plain, full-fat Greek yogurt, a reliable, probiotic, protein-rich choice. Why it helps? Plain, full-fat Greek yogurt offers concentrated intact dairy protein, natural milk fat that slows digestion, and often contains a good number of live cultures. The intact protein and the fat together create a food matrix that supports steady blood sugar, satiety, and the amino acid availability needed for muscle repair, a priority for older adults. What to look for in the store. Shop for plain and full fat on the label and check the ingredient list. Ideally, ingredients will read something like milk, live cultures. Avoid products that add whey protein isolate, milk protein concentrate, or a long list of preservatives and stabilizers. If the package lists heat treated after fermentation or simply fails to list any cultures, assume it won't deliver reliable live microbes. How seniors often benefit. For older adults trying to preserve or build muscle, a 150-200 gram serving of plain, full-fat Greek yogurt provides a helpful protein dose when spaced throughout the day. In outpatient practice, I've observed patients who replace a processed flavored cup with plain Greek yogurt and nuts and report steadier morning glucose readings and fewer cravings later in the day. Practical serving and pairings. Use plain, full-fat Greek yogurt as a breakfast base or a snack. Add a quarter cup of berries, a tablespoon of chopped walnuts, or a tablespoon of chia seeds for fiber and healthy fats. If you want more protein at that meal without isolated powders, include an egg or a few slices of smoked salmon on the side. 3. Kefir, the highest probiotic diversity in a drinkable form. Why it helps. Kefir is a fermented milk drink that typically contains a wider variety of microorganisms than most yogurts, both bacteria and yeasts, creating greater probiotic diversity. That diversity can be particularly helpful in older adults, because aging often reduces microbiome variety. Kefir also partially breaks down lactose during fermentation, so some people with lactose sensitivity tolerate it better than fresh milk. What to look for in the store? Choose plain, unsweetened kefir that lists live cultures and contains no added sugars or artificial sweeteners. Avoid heavily flavored kefir drinks that are essentially milkshakes with probiotics added. Many of those have significant added sugar that defeats the purpose. How to start safely? If you haven't had kefir before, begin with small amounts to let your system adapt. Start with half a cup, roughly 120 ml, every other day, and increase gradually to 1 cup daily if tolerated. Some people experience mild bloating or increased gas at first. That often settles over 1 to 2 weeks as the microbiome adjusts. If bloating is pronounced or persists, reduce the amount and consult with your clinician. Clinical evidence framing. Small trials and observational studies show that kefir can increase microbial diversity and reduce some inflammatory markers in older adults and people with metabolic issues. The strength of evidence varies by study size and endpoint. I'll put specific links to those trials in the description so you can read them yourself. Practical serving and pairings. Drink kefir straight. Mix half kefir with half plain yogurt for a creamier texture, or blend kefir with a handful of berries for a probiotic smoothie. No added sugar. If you're using kefir for the first time, use it as a daily beverage or a source of probiotics 2 to 4 times a week. 4. Homemade plain yogurt, maximum control and a practical project. Why it helps? Making yogurt at home gives you control over the milk source, fat level and starter cultures. When properly made, homemade yogurt can contain robust live cultures and lacks the hidden sugars and additives present in many commercial tubs. It's also a practical way to use goat milk or to choose milks you trust. Basic, reliable approach. There are several tried and true home methods. A simple approach is to warm milk to a point where it's hot enough to change consistency. This helps the finished yogurt set. Cool to a warm, but not hot temperature. Stir in a small amount of plain yogurt containing live cultures as a starter and keep at a steady warm temperature for several hours to allow fermentation. If you prefer specifics, temperatures, incubation times and troubleshooting tips, I've put step-by-step guides and a dedicated tutorial link in the description. Why I recommend homemade for some seniors. Homemade yogurt avoids stabilizers, artificial sweeteners and protein isolates, and it allows you to choose full-fat milk if desired. For family caregivers, making a few jars at a time is often economical and gives you a predictable, simple product you can trust. Food safety and practical notes. Use clean equipment and refrigerate promptly after fermentation. If you notice off smells, discoloration, or visible mold, discard the batch. If you are immunocompromised or have complex medical issues, check with your clinician before beginning home fermentation projects. Practical label reading and shopping checklist. What to avoid, what to prefer. Words to watch for, red flags. When you're reading ingredient panels, these names should trigger caution. They're associated with added sugar, ultra-processing, or additives that can negatively influence gut health or metabolic response. Sugar synonyms: sucrose, high fructose corn syrup solids, fructose, dextrose, glucose, maltodextrin, concentrated fruit juice, fruit puree from concentrate. If added sugar exceeds about 10-15 grams per serving, treat the product as high in sugar. 20-25 grams per serving is common in fruit on the bottom tubs and is roughly 5 teaspoons of sugar. Stabilizers and gums: carrageenan, gar gum, xanthan gum, locust bean gum, modified food starch. Their presence isn't automatically harmful for everyone, but if you have persistent gut sensitivity, choose products without them. Artificial sweeteners: sucralose, acesulfame potassium, aspartame, saccharin. Studies suggest these can alter the microbiome in some individuals. For older adults with metabolic issues, prefer no artificial sweeteners. Isolated proteins and concentrates: whey protein isolate, milk protein concentrate, caseinates. These are not the same as intact dairy protein and may be harder for some older adults to digest. Very high daily intake of these should be discussed with a clinician if you have kidney concerns. Heat treated after fermentation or absence of named cultures. These are likely to have few viable live microbes. Green flags: what to prefer. Look for short, transparent ingredient lists and named cultures. Ingredients that are simple and whole: milk or goat milk, cream, if full fat, and the named live cultures, for example, Streptococcus thermophilus, Lactobacillus delbrueckii subsp. Bulgaricus, Lactobacillus acidophilus, Bifidobacterium species. Plain labeling: plain, without added sugars and unsweetened, or no added sugar, but always check the ingredient list to confirm. Contains live and active cultures, with cultures named on the label. Minimal stabilizers, or none at all. Quick rule of thumb: if the front of the package highlights low fat, diet, protein, or fruit on the bottom, flip it over and check the ingredient panel. If you see more than 3 or 4 additives, isolated proteins, or more than 10-15 grams of added sugar, consider it a product to avoid. Portion guidance and frequency: a practical daily plan. Serving sizes that work for most older adults. A single serving of plain yogurt is typically 150-200 grams, 5 to 7 ounces. For most people over 60, one serving a day of plain full-fat Greek yogurt or a half cup to 1 cup of kefir is a reasonable routine. If you want to use yogurt as a protein snack mid-morning or mid-afternoon, that single serving works well when combined with a small handful of nuts or fruit. Spacing protein through the day. To support muscle maintenance, aim to spread protein across meals rather than concentrating all of it in one meal. For example, 20-30 grams of protein at breakfast, lunch and dinner, with yogurt contributing part of the breakfast or snack protein, tends to be more effective for muscle protein synthesis than a single large protein intake. Special kidney caution. If you have known chronic kidney disease or if your most recent lab work shows reduced estimated glomerular filtration rate, eGFR, discuss total daily protein targets with your clinician or renal dietitian. Very high daily intakes of isolated protein supplements or multiple protein fortified products can create an added renal workload in susceptible people. Simple swaps you can do this week. Sat. Swap a low-fat fruit cup for plain, full-fat Greek yogurt plus fresh berries and a teaspoon of honey. Replace a high-protein processed cup with plain Greek yogurt and a tablespoon of chopped walnuts or a cooked egg on the side. If you miss frozen textures, make small frozen yogurt bites. Drop teaspoons of plain yogurt mixed with mashed fruit onto a sheet and freeze into tiny pops, no added sugar. Try kefir as a smoothie base with frozen berries and a half banana. Start with half a cup and increase slowly. If you want to start making yogurt at home, make a single small batch first and refrigerate. Use it for breakfast with fruit for 3 to 4 days so you can assess tolerance. 2 short clinical vignettes to bring this home. I already told you about Henry, who switched from a marketed healthy cup to plain Greek yogurt and felt better. Here are 2 more brief examples that illustrate patterns I see. Mary, age 74, had daily bloating and irregular bowels. She was eating a variety of light and diet yogurts sweetened with sucralose and carrageenan. After switching to plain kefir twice a week and plain full-fat yogurt the other days, she reported improved regularity and less bloating within 3 weeks. We tracked this clinically, and it aligned with small trial data suggesting fermentation can ease bowel symptoms in some older adults. Jorge, age 82, lived alone and relied on single-serve flavored Greek cups because they were convenient. His daily intake of added sugars had crept up without him noticing. His fasting glucose rose. We worked with a caregiver to stock plain full-fat Greek yogurt, pre-portioned berries, and pre-measured nuts for easy assembly. Within 6 weeks, his glucose variability improved, and he reported fewer mid-afternoon energy dips. What about people who still want flavored yogurt or convenience? If you prefer flavored products for taste or convenience, be choosy. Look for single-serve products that are low in added sugar, under 10 to 12 grams per serving. List live cultures and avoid artificial sweeteners and isolated protein additives. Use flavored tubs sparingly rather than daily, and whenever possible, combine them with whole food fats and fiber, such as a small handful of almonds, to slow digestion. A short note about commonly misspelled ingredients. You may encounter misspellings on transcriptions or in conversations. Where a name looks unfamiliar, carginen, gargum, or asylum potassium, those usually map to carrageenan, guargum, and acesulfame potassium respectively. If a label uses a genuinely unclear additive name, flag it and research the ingredient or choose a different product. Final recap and a practical checklist you can screenshot. Recap in 1 paragraph. Avoid low-fat fruit tubs loaded with 20-25 grams of added sugar and stabilizers, flavored commercial Greek cups that use gums and protein concentrates, artificially sweetened protein cups, and ultra-processed high-protein yogurts, and frozen desserts that are heat-treated and behave like sugary desserts. Choose plain, full-fat Greek yogurt, goat milk yogurt, kefir, plain, unsweetened, and homemade yogurt made with live cultures. Read ingredient lists, watch for added sugar and artificial sweeteners, and prefer short ingredient lists that name live cultures. Shopping checklist to keep in your pocket. Red flags: added sugar, sucrose, high fructose corn syrup, dextrose, maltodextrin, sucralose, acesulfame potassium, whey protein isolate, milk protein concentrate, carrageenan, xanthan gum, guar gum, heat-treated after fermentation, or no cultures listed. Green flags: plain, full-fat, ingredients milk or goat milk, live cultures named, unsweetened or no added sugar, short ingredient list. Portion advice: 150-200 gr, 5 to 7 oz, is 1 serving for yogurt. Start kefir at half a cup and increase gradually. Where to learn more and the evidence behind these recommendations. When I say studies show or research suggests, I'm basing those statements on randomized trials, small clinical studies, and mechanistic research. The quality and size of those studies vary. Some are small trials showing improvements in bowel habits or inflammatory markers with kefir or fermented dairy, while others are lab and animal studies that raise plausible mechanisms for how emulsifiers and artificial sweeteners influence the microbiome. I'll place the specific references, study links, and a shopping PDF with key red flag ingredient names in the description below so you can read the papers and see the exact wording for yourself. A final medical caveat and an invitation. A short clinical caveat. None of this is a cure-all. Foods interact with medications, underlying chronic conditions, and individual biology. If you have advanced kidney disease, uncontrolled diabetes, or are on a medically restricted diet, talk to your clinician before making major changes, especially if you're considering high daily intakes of isolated protein products or new supplements. For most otherwise healthy older adults, the changes I've described, choosing plain fermented options, reducing added sugars and artificial sweeteners, and spreading protein across the day, are safe and often helpful. You don't need to do everything at once. Swap one product this week, replace a flavored cup with plain yogurt plus berries, and notice how you feel after 2 weeks. Small, consistent changes add up more than dramatic short-term shifts. If this message landed with you, tell me below where you're watching from and whether you still eat yogurt every morning. I read those comments and they help me shape future videos and practical tips for different parts of the country and different grocery offerings. If you found this useful, please like this video, subscribe to Senior Healthcare for more evidence-based guidance, and share it with someone over 60 who reaches for a healthy cup without checking the label. Remember to check the description for the study links, the shopping checklist PDF, and a step-by-step tutorial on making yogurt at home. Thank you for watching and for taking these small steps toward food choices that support steady energy, digestive comfort, and muscle and bone health as we age.